agency has issued a tsunami warning.
March 11th, 2011. The largest earthquake in Japan's modern history triggers a massive tsunami. The waves crush the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, and the most severe nuclear crisis in a quarter century begins. The world watches as desperate attempts are made to prevent a nuclear meltdown that could poison and kill thousands. Past nuclear disasters such as Chernobyl come rushing to mind. But is our fear unfounded? The earthquake and tsunami create a human tragedy beyond imagination. Destruction and devastation that will take years to rebuild. While Japan sinks into shock and ruins, reactor number 1 of the Fukushima nuclear plant explodes, and a new crisis begins. The nuclear disaster drives thousands of people from their homes, fearing atomic radiation. The legacy of this crisis is not only the destroyed plant and the massive risks of radiation, but also an unanswered question about the future of nuclear power. The Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant disaster is the worst nuclear catastrophe in Japan's history. And this is the story of how it all began. The old Fukushima Daiichi nuclear station is one of Japan's earliest plants, built in the 1960s. This 9.0 magnitude earthquake may be the greatest in Japan's modern history. At first, it seems everything at the plant is going according to an emergency plan. Water cooling systems keep the excess heat under control. The nightmare outcome of failure is meltdown. The quake cuts off electricity to the vital cooling pumps, but backup batteries and diesel generators step in to keep them running. Yet from the depths of the sea, the tsunami waves relentlessly surge toward shore.
We're at tsunami, obviously coming in several sweeps.
A 14-meter wave slams into the nuclear plant, drowning the emergency generators. Now, operators face a serious problem. They cannot cool the nuclear core. The roots of the crisis lie in the inherent design flaws of Fukushima's reactors. These 50-year-old boiling water reactors are encased by a shell of concrete and steel, surrounding the internal pressure vessel that holds the nuclear core and fuel. Without cooling, temperature and pressure inside the core soar. As reactor water boils away and evaporates, the water level drops. Only hours remain before boiling and meltdown spiral out of control, when another danger arises. March 12th, one day after the tsunami, Unit 1 of Fukushima explodes, sounding alarm bells across the world. Then, 2 days later, on March 14th, Reactor 3 explodes, and it seems the situation is slipping away. At first, officials from TEPCO, the power company operating the plant, try to calm the crisis. They claim no atomic radiation has been released.
急遽社長に変わりまして
But when radioactive steam is vented from units 1, 2, and 3, they are forced to admit that radioactive material has entered the atmosphere. Japanese authorities establish a 20-kilometer exclusion zone and advise even those within 30 kilometers to stay away from radiation. 200,000 people are evacuated to temporary shelters, and radiation checkpoints are set up. The relentless battle of Fukushima has begun. For the first time in nuclear history, 4 reactors are simultaneously out of control. The world stands at the razor's edge of an unprecedented nuclear catastrophe. Day 4 of the crisis. At Fukushima, the risk of nuclear disaster rises as conditions worsen. 2 massive explosions have ripped off the roofs of reactor buildings 1 and 3. Soon it becomes clear that the blasts were caused by hydrogen produced when reactor water levels dropped. With no water or power to cool the nuclear fuel, engineers begin the fight to prevent catastrophic meltdown. They choose the only option available: pumping seawater into the overheating cores. The explosion at Reactor 3 is the most terrifying. This reactor uses a different type of fuel containing plutonium, far more toxic and dangerous. Containing this reactor is more critical than any other. Fukushima engineers work around the clock to keep the reactors cool. Volunteer firefighters arrive daily, deploying pumps and hoses from fire trucks. Radiation levels are so high that they can only work short shifts. The outside world watches with mounting horror. The International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna puts its emergency center on full alert. Rising radiation levels outside the plant are detected, and the evacuation of every person within 20 kilometers continues. Day 5. The crisis grows more serious. A new threat emerges: the possible release of massive radiation. The explosions at Units 1 and 3 did not expose the reactor cores, but across all units, spent nuclear fuel, hot and highly radioactive, is stored in open pools atop the reactor buildings. The pools of Unit 4 are especially full, since all its fuel had been removed for storage. With cooling pumps disabled, water levels fall, exposing the fuel rods. The rods could ignite, triggering an uncontrollable fire that releases radioactive smoke, dust, and particles into the air. A desperate operation begins to refill the pools with water and prevent a nuclear disaster that could rival Chernobyl. Even helicopters are deployed to dump seawater onto the reactors. Despite their fierce efforts, 2 fires break out in Unit 4, one of them in the spent fuel pool area. Radiation spikes at the site and spreads across towns and cities. For weeks, radioactive emissions continue from the stricken plant. At first, most of it is carried out to sea by wind. Then the winds shift, and fallout rains down over Japan's densely populated main island. Contamination even reaches Tokyo's tap water. The nuclear crisis now directly threatens millions of lives and spreads beyond Japan's borders. The US, Canada, Australia, Hong Kong, Russia, and Singapore ban imports of Japanese food. No one is yet safe as the battle to save Fukushima enters a new, tense phase. At the plant, much of the site is now flooded with huge amounts of water from desperate cooling efforts. 2 workers who waded into water are hospitalized with radiation burns to their legs. Soon, radioactive water leaks into the ocean. But then, good news arrives. By the end of the second week, engineers finally restore partial power to the crippled plant. This means they can stop relying on corrosive seawater and instead use fresh water delivered by ships. Eventually, after sealing cracks that leaked radioactive water into the sea, their bold efforts to avoid total nuclear catastrophe appear to succeed. Yet the plant remains in a precarious state for months. The global response to Fukushima is swift. Governments launch urgent safety reviews. These mean stricter regulations and higher costs for nuclear power. Climate change has driven the rise of alternative energy sources like wind and solar, and what the nuclear industry calls a nuclear renaissance. But the industry insists, trust us, modern reactor designs are very different from Fukushima's 50-year-old units. Still, one obvious way to reduce the risk of nuclear disaster remains. Stop building nuclear plants in active earthquake zones. 20% of the world's nuclear plants, including all 55 in Japan, are built in seismic regions. 1 month after the crisis began, stabilizing the damaged and partially melted reactor cores remains a dangerous challenge. Temporary cooling must continue for months. Draining radioactive floodwaters is critical, yet carries the risk of further leaks. It will take years before the site is safe again. The events of Fukushima are a grim reminder of nuclear power's dangers. And once the problem begins, the consequences are so vast, so terrifying, and so far beyond our control that we must ask ourselves now, is nuclear power worth the risk?